Established in 1884, the Grolier Club was the first organization in America to regularly exhibit books as objects of artistic and historical interest, on a par with paintings and sculpture. The club takes its name after the Renaissance book collector Jean Grolier, famous for lending books to his friends. It should be no surprise, then, that the club recently mounted the extensive exhibit, Printing for Kingdom, Empire, and Republic, Treasures from the Archives of the Imprimerie Nationale, curated by H. George Fletcher. Canapé tours the paradise for Francophile bibliophiles.
The Imprimerie Nationale has the capability of printing some 100 languages and dialects using 64 fonts that they have in different typefaces for areas in Asia principally, and other exotic fonts that they had been involved with going back into the late 16th century. Indeed, they began life as a group of royal printers in Greek, so that the works of Greek classical antiquity and patristics, the works of the Greek fathers of the church, could be printed locally in Paris using types created there. What the exhibition from the Imprimerie Nationale does is showcase for the first time outside France one of the world's great typographic establishments. And we have in relatively few pieces of materials, metal, books, documents, copper plates, and so forth, the history of nearly 500 years of typographic experiment and success and maintenance. Everything begins here. These are the Royal Greek typefaces from the 1530s up to 1540, 1541. You have the manuscript on which they're modeled, and you have the work that Garamond did in this first size, the 16 point. What you have with this is really the Renaissance arriving in France in the 1530s under Francois Premier. You have the ability to print the works of Greek classical antiquity in the original language, which previously had to be done using either defective font or had to be imported from Italy. And now this could happen in the capital. Arguably, the most famous, the most important of the proprietary typefaces of the Imprimerie Nationale are the different sizes of type of the Roman du Roi. We have the book commissioned by Louis XIV, the medals of his triumphs, military and civil. We have the copper plates with which they were printed. We have the copper plates and the designs of the letters. We have a whole suite of the punches and matrices, and we have the different sizes created by Grandjean, by Alexandre, and by Luce. So we have everything from 120 point to this microscopically tiny 4-point type. The scholarly enterprise that went on across many of the decades of the 19th century involved linguistic scholars who worked with the engravers, who themselves were very skillful working in metal. They work in steel and copper and lead. What happens principally is that one has a model to work with, so they are national manuscripts, they are national treasures of their own countries. And working with scholars, the engravers created steel punches. It could take one day to create one punch, or it could take a month to create one punch, depending on how elaborate it is. And it takes a great deal of training and skill. One works up a certain amount of speed over time, but it's very labor-intensive and very painstaking. Starting in the latter part of the 19th century, this replication of the type began to be done by machine rather than by hand, but for some 4 centuries before that, it was cast by hand using hand molds, so that the operation of that would require hundreds of thousands of different elements in working with the mold, breaking it open, putting it back together, pouring the lead into it, breaking that out, and you would do perhaps 1 million openings and closings of a hand mold in the course of creating an entire font of type with which you could print large works requiring many pages of composition. I think the most interesting type, so to speak, among the Oriental fonts are the wooden ideograms for Chinese that were created in the 18th century. These are known as the Regent's boxwoods because they're carved in boxwoods. They are wonderful little works of art on their own, and there are 224,000 of them. So there are combinations of all the different elements that go in to constitute an ideogram, and then therefore the objects, the words, the concepts that they represent. They also have preserved certain terms and vocabulary which no longer exist in Chinese, so they are themselves a treasure house of a language that is used in different ways, not quite the same as it was. At the end of the 19th century, we have this volcanic eruption in the book arts. The then director of the Imprimerie Nationale, as it was called at that time and is called to this day, was a man named Arthur Christian, and he determined that they could launch into a whole new area of creation of books, which is what we know of for the past century as the artist book or the livre d'artiste, combining the work of poets and writers with artists using fine materials, limited editions, creating works of art in their own right. And this is in many ways virtually the last full-scale operation that survives, with people doing this all day, every day. So they are a full-service book production facility. It used to be extremely common around the world. And considering what has happened by and large over the past generation or generation and a half, it's nothing short of a miracle that so much of this physical material survives and is continuing in use. I'm not talking about the electronic replacement of the book. I'm talking about a different type of physical book. It's a great honor that it is here. It goes to the club's purposes in championing the history of the book and keeping it vital. And I'm enough of a fossil to appreciate what I grew up with and to hope that it would continue and that there would be opportunities for later generations to discover type on paper and wonderful printing methods which the atelier can do. So it's very personal, but I don't think I'm entirely alone in this.